In a world of social media and videos and vlogs and everything else in between, we do get a bit caught up with how many likes or hits that we've had or comments. And I'm about to talk about a podcast that had over 3,000 viewers that I was part of. There's two of us on the podcast. And the reason I mention that is quite surprising to me because it was around resilience. And it was also about something called Brexit. Yes, I've mentioned the B word. I think that's the first time I mentioned the B word on my podcast, but there you go. So I did a short podcast around resilience and Brexit. And here are my top 10. It just ended up being a top 10 of things that I recommended. So, and this basically, Brexit, don't worry about that if it's not your thing. This is about times of change. How can you remain resilient during those times of change? Brexit for organizations, company owners, whatever it might be, people with operations and trade agreements, big change. So take the word Brexit bit out if you don't need it. So number one, provide as much certainty as you can in uncertain times. So just have that ability to meet and communicate with people, even if you say we don't know what's happening yet. Because that certainty, we don't know what's happening yet in uncertain times. Pay attention to the physical, emotional, intellectual aspects of the performance. So is it about providing information, dates, which is more intellectual, or is it about communities and more reassurance, which is a bit more emotional, etc. Think about timescales of change so you can develop resilience. So think about what's happening for people at start, middle and end. And there's different phases, for example, to Brexit as there are other changes. So think about those timescales and how they need to play out and what you need to do either for yourself or to help team members during those different times. Resilience can be defined as being motivated, optimistic and curious. So what we're wondering is, in times of change, are you still motivated? Are you still optimistic? Are you still curious? And those are your kind of indicators to work with. Talk about resilience being more of a state than a skill. So you do need a skill to some extent, but it's more state than skill. The physical environments, the mindset, group dynamics and creativity are all aspects that can suffer in times of change and ones we need to boost. I've talked about that quite a lot before. Time, you have to focus on the here and now. It's no good talking about, well, in 2 years this will mean that, because we just don't know that. So focus, compress time as much as you can on the present moment, whether that's this day, this week, this month, this quarter, whatever that might be. Resilient people manage their cognitive overload really well, so they just won't take on too much or won't think about it too much. For me, Brexit was, find out as much as I can, particularly on day one, morning one, I was driving, I remember. And it's like, right, turn it off, that's enough now. Don't take too much, but how do you overload is really important. And I would say there with, on an organisation sense, don't overload the organisation with too much at one time, particularly in times of change. What have we got? Number 9, 2 more to go. What can you create in order to boost resilience? So what can you do in terms of resources that's already out there? But what can you create internally to boost resilience? Because again, that's more tailored. That's a good approach as well. And finally, you think about communities, that power of community. Even if the community doesn't know what's happening, the certainty of coming together brings people together for a common goal to explore and share and find out more. So in times of change, Brexit or otherwise, how can you remain resilient? Take a look at the podcast. There's also Jan Hills there, who's come from a neuroscience background and resilience, still on Brexit as well. So it's a really good podcast and one that I can recommend from times of change and even times of political change that we're facing right now in Europe and beyond.